And I will just let you guys through. I think Max is all set. Oh, and there's a sign-in sheet that's going around. Sign your name.
There's a light on.
Yeah, you should be able to do half of it somehow. Maybe reverse it, I think. There you go.
Good. All right. Thanks for coming. Thanks again, ARC, for attending today. My name is Aaron Goose. With me is Landon Reed and James Wong. And we'll be talking today about emerging data sources in transit planning. So just a brief outline what we're going to go over. A brief introduction, background, motivation. We'll be looking at some existing tools with transit planning. And then we'll start to kind of step through some of the emerging data sources that we're trying to leverage with this project. We'll take you on a site visit. It'll be exciting. And then we'll kind of talk about some future work that we have in store for this project. So brief introduction, some background to where we're coming from with this. Typically with transit planning, it's very ad hoc in nature. You're kind of pulling in various data sources that are often fixed and not dynamic. And oftentimes they're very inaccessible unless you have direct access to those. So our motivation then is to utilize a lot of these emerging open data sets that are out there via online methodologies, and then view the relationship between these data sources and transit for better transit planning purposes. And so our goal then is to automate this across all agencies, all regions in the US, and create essentially a web-based tool to visualize these relationships between the data. So some existing methods that we took a look at. Obviously, you're all familiar with the TCQSM, utilizing a lot of your route scheduling data, very fixed in nature, and it also sometimes pulls in census data for some of the metrics that it analyzes to provide some sort of transit service metric, with frequency and headways of that nature. Some new sites that we found, the TOD database and the Zeitgeist online tools, they leverage a lot of the census information and then combine that on a stop level basis to provide sort of a snapshot at each stop, kind of the demographics with the census data. But they kind of stop there. It's mostly demographic in nature. So when we set about to kind of improve on these methodologies and start to pull in some more data sources, there were three key concepts that we wanted to look at with each of the sources: accessibility, consistency, and robustness. So with accessibility, essentially, is the data open? Is it accessible for all agencies, all regions, at all times, from one key central repository? With consistency, we wanted to make sure that the data was organized, consistent across all agencies, both in the fields and the types of data that were utilized. And then robustness. This step was trying to take a further level of take it to a further level of detail with the analysis, and not have so high level analysis, but more on a stop level, route level basis. So we wanted to make sure that the data would give that level of detail that we needed. So just taking a look at the census, which gave us sort of that baseline to work with demographics. Obviously, you get your age, your income, race, commute patterns, employment. This comes from the American Community Survey as well. So advantages, obviously, it's very reliable, very accurate. It comes from an official source, and it's standard across all regions. Some disadvantages, however, is with the census block, just the size of the census block, trying to analyze from there, and then the accessibility with APIs versus downloads. The second big source that we pulled from, obviously, was the GTFS, General Transit Feed Specification, which gives you your routes, your stops, stop times, shapes, trips. And so advantages with that, you get consistent across all regions. It's been specified from Google for agencies to utilize in that format. And it's fairly accurate because it's coming from an official source, such as the transit agencies. Some disadvantages we found when we started really digging into this, there are still a lot of variations. Even though it's a standard, you get really strange issues with some of the data types and just trying to make it all work together. And then there still isn't a good method to kind of aggregate it all on an agency level basis. So just some examples of what you can produce just from a GTFS for metric analysis. You can get your average headway, your stop spacing, hours of service, span of service. These are variables that you're familiar with just from the TCQSM. And then you can also look at, on a temporal basis, the number of vehicles that are currently in service at a given time. And then, a lot of your basic information, stop locations, routes, etc. And now Landon's going to continue with some of the other data sources that we started to pull from.
Thanks. So the third kind of major cluster of data sources that we pulled from were online APIs, and that stands for Application Programming Interface. Basically, it's a way to communicate with servers that are maintained elsewhere on the web. So for us, that included Yelp and Google Places. The types of data that they provide are place-based, so they give information on all the restaurants, the schools, the parks, different landmarks, really any kind of point of interest that you might be interested in. So the advantage of this data are that it's dynamic and it's constantly updated. So we can make a query today, and it might be different from something we query in a week or so. With a land use shapefile, that's not going to be the case. And it's also consistent across all regions. So Yelp here in Atlanta is the same as Yelp in San Francisco. The query nature is all the same. Its syntax is the same, just the data is different. The disadvantages are, though, that there's some limits on how the data is structured. So the number of results that are returned, because if you say all the restaurants in the Atlanta area, it's going to be thousands and thousands. And so there's some limits on what you can actually make as far as requests go. And also the accuracy of the data can be spotty here and there, depending on how well it's maintained. So like I said, there are many, many different options you can choose from. This is not even the whole list of types of places that you can query. So just point out a couple. Parks, you might be interested in the amount of green space that is around a bus stop. So that's kind of a proxy for that measure. Groceries are up there. So you can kind of figure out if a place is like around a bus stop is a food desert. So these are the kinds of things that we were working with and trying to pull out. So just some considerations when we're trying to connect all these pipes together. The first one is that a lot of these data sources are geospatial. So one really easy way to kind of show different data sources together is on a map, or doing a query on a certain latitude and longitude with a radius. So we utilize that quite a bit. Also, like Aaron mentioned, there's a temporal nature to the data, especially the GTFS, so we can kind of look at different quality of service measures over a period of time. Are we looking at Monday? Are we looking at Saturday? That's going to be different. Also, over the course of a day, how does service vary? The other thing we wanted to consider was the currency, how up-to-date the data is, and also how well we can automate it. Because our goal is to make this tool available for any agency with GTFS, which there's over 200 agencies in America. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to upload a new data set, process all the information, and keep it up to date. So that's a huge thing for us. So right now we'll go into a brief demonstration. Keep in mind this is an alpha version, so it might not be polished all the way, but this is Transitious, what we decided to call the tool. And, right? Delicious. So this is the splash screen. It just kind of tells you about what the tool is. And you can see that we have 4 agencies right now. MARTA, SEPTA, which is in Philly, CTA, because we presented this in Chicago, so we had to have CTA up there, and BART in San Francisco. So James will click on MARTA for us. We're getting here the routes, which is from the GTFS, really simple. And also we're getting this aggregate statistic type information we've calculated. You can see number of trips per day, so over the course of a week, over the course of a day here, so the number of trips by time. You can see the morning and the afternoon peak here pretty visibly. So if you hover over the different bar, you can see the number of trips that are actually in operation at that 5-minute bucket interval. We also have average route speed, which is just a histogram showing you the number of trips that travel at that average speed. So you can see it's kind of hovering around 20 miles per hour there. And then on the right, you have route headway, which another histogram showing the number of trips with a given headway in minutes. So we can click on a route and drill down a little further. And this is the number 6. A lot of you wrote that for the data collection assignment. You may remember it. So here we're getting all the stops that serve that route. On the right here we have some kind of high-level aggregate statistics, similar to what we saw earlier, route speed, stop spacing, hours of service. And then down at the bottom here we have the distribution of trips over time. Again, similar to the chart before, but this is just for that route. So we can see that it peaks at about, in the evening, about 6 trips, and it maintains that for a little while. But you can see that the service stops for the morning hours and all that good stuff. So we'll click on a stop here, and what's first being pulled up is just a map to help orient people if they are curious about what the surroundings of the stop look like. Street view up there and just a Google map. Click on the service. Once again, we get kind of the service characteristics of that particular stop. And so we can click on the day of the week to kind of see the different service and how it varies. We also have people. This is the demographic information. So US Census, American Community Survey, that type of information. We have median household income on the top right there. We see a distribution chart of ages. So this is all pulled from the census. And once again, we have locale. And this is looking at the land use around a given bus stop. You can change the radius to expand or detract the scope. And you can see we have means of transportation, employment sector, and then we start to pull in the restaurant Yelp data, and this is from Google Places. We'll look at lots of schools here, lots of restaurants and food, a lot of green space. Where is this, James?
La Vista Road.
La Vista Road, okay. So
Great.
we're in
A mile radius.
Decatur area, so this makes sense. Lots of liquor stores. That's an important planning characteristic. So this is basically what we have so far. Again, it's our first take at it, and we've enjoyed this, so we want to continue to refine it. So maybe, if you're lucky, you can visit www.transitious in a few weeks, months, and your site. Someone's heard of James, and he's going to talk about what we learned here.
So just a couple of closing remarks. So we did learn a lot about what's going on in this data and how to use it. And one of the things, lessons on transit analysis, we mentioned GTFS is very detailed information, and TCQSM has some good methodologies, but there are still some disconnects. Finding kind of fundamental questions like, what is a route? If you look at the 110, you can just call that all one route, but some of them stop at art centers, some of them go all the way. How do you define what unit of analysis you're using, especially if we're going to do this consistently across every agency and every route in the country? If you have headway analysis and you want an average headway, does that incorporate the fact that sometimes a bus isn't going to go the full length of the route, and you're going to have sort of double length headways on the outside of your routes? So some of those things came up, and that was something that we sort of made some assumptions for, but understand that we have to be very clear about how we're calculating these things. The next major steps, and like I said, there was a lot of ambition in the beginning, but we quickly realized that the data needed to be worked a lot to get it together, and so a lot of the work that we did was sort of incorporating these. Our next steps are to use it to identify kind of user scenarios. We want to find great uses for all this data now that's in one place. I mean, we just showed you some quick visualizations of like just what the information is, but we want to pull it together for actual practical purposes. So if you're a transit planner, you might have questions about EJ issues, about Title VI. What is the racial or economic profile of areas where you might be considering changes to service? Or what are the land use trends, if you're interested in TOD, what are the land use trends associated with some of your highest or lowest frequency services? So you can start to combine these kinds of information, and we think that that's some of the useful stuff. We got a lot of great ideas from APA on how to use this data and apply it. We also want to create some reporting features to make it easy for folks to look at and print off a set of data so they can actually use it. And create more contextual information. So if I tell you about the average headway, that doesn't mean as much to you unless you know, well, what is the headway throughout the rest of the agency? So we want to sort of internally mash up that information so you can see what it means in the context of this agency or other agencies. And then the last part is the visualization and taking to that next real level. These are two really fun examples that have popped up very recently. One is from the New Yorker that talks about what is the median income by stop for different subway routes. And it gives you some indication of what are the different kinds of areas that this route serves. So we see that as something that now that we have all the data in one place, we can do that consistently across different agencies. And similarly, there was a recent data competition in San Francisco, Zurich, and somewhere else that I forget. And they were using this information to show what is the overlay of bus frequency and poverty. So dark green areas have higher poverty, larger circles have more bus frequency. So you can see that this area in San Francisco actually does serve some of its lower income areas very well. So that's most of our work. We're really looking forward. We're still sort of taking this as a side project and going forward with it. And want to thank our lab and our departments. And also, we had some assistance from programming and web development from Jack Reed, who's at Georgia State, and want to make sure we said thank you to him as well. So we'd be happy to take any questions, and thank you very much.
Questions?
Can you go back to the website where you talk about the headways? So you are calculating those headways based on like expected arrival times from the GTFS data? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's all schedule based. There's no real time here, although this does kind of, we didn't talk to it much here because we didn't have time, but this does set sort of the groundwork for being able to use real-time data and archive it and have it as a way to use it here for planning. But the way we did that is defining your headway as when you are standing at one stop, what is the time between arrivals of the same route, which fundamentally is very easy, but when you talk about an average, that's when you get into real aggregation concerns. So the distribution that we showed, like the histogram, we tried to show as much data as possible, so it wasn't making too many assumptions on it.
Cool. One other question. Your graph that shows like the number of trips on a route, is that the number like in that given hour of like buses that are currently driving that route, or
Exactly.
Okay.
So that we use that as sort of the proxy for max vehicles in service, and so now we can calculate that. Actually, the graph above is for the whole agency, and we can do that by route or by time of day, and so you can cut it up a lot of different ways. But actually, what we found was we had too many ways to cut it up, and we were sort of struggling to find what's the quickest coherent way to show it. So this is 300 buses running at one time.
Okay, so it's like deployed buses.
Yeah,
Okay.
active buses within the system,
Got it.
or running a trip.
Cool. Thank you.
For the census data, how did you define the quarter-mile block and or quarter-mile circular area and census blocks, those two different units of analysis?
So it's kind of complicated and it's not ideal, but
Which is why I'm asking the question.
so the unit of analysis we were using for the census data was block group. We tried to use, we had to download the tables because we couldn't use the census's API because it didn't have that granularity, so that was some challenging stuff we had to deal with. But as far as calculating the actual, like say, population over in the quarter mile, we took, we might have to draw this out. So we took all of the block groups that radius, that buffer touched, and we took their areas, right, summed them together, and then we took each individual block group's area and put that over the total,
Normalized.
and that was kind of our weight, and then multiplied that
So
by
it's effectively a weighted average
An
weighted
area
by
within
the area within.
Assuming
the
equal
circle.
distribution.
Yeah. Makes
Yeah.
sense,
So it's probably not accurate,
but it's a reasonable
but it's,
assumption.
yeah, it's an assumption. Thanks.
I was just wondering, do you have a way, so if you have a radius around the rail station, is there a way to count the number of intersections and the type of roads that exist within that area?
I think we could get to that with OpenStreetMap.
And that's one of those next steps. We
Yeah.
I mean, we have a long list of
Fun things we want to
data sets that we want to
Well, let me
include,
put
and
it
we
into
don't have
context then.
OpenStreetMap yet.
The reason I think that would be really useful is if you're doing TOD, one of the common misconceptions is that it's just about the catchment area immediately around. But what I was saying with a colleague about this, what might be a better way to think about that would be how many intersections you actually have and what types of frequency or, well, the type of just the road basically that are at those intersections. So to think about how much flow is actually occurring in that area and then how much catchment you have. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
I think we can pull, it's technically feasible.
I mean, Walk Score does that right now. It was more of us figuring out how to,
to get the API.
they didn't give us their code, unfortunately.
Yeah, we've tried to
We
use,
know it can be done though.
one thing we didn't point out is we've tried to use all free tools and modules, so it's been challenging to work within those confines. We don't have the geospatial analysis, the level of analysis that we'd like right now, but maybe we could get a grant.
I mean, since it's all free, we're on like Google Fusion tables, and that's our spatial analysis. So we can't do network analysis, like a network distance of a quarter mile. It still has to be
So we're doing
your air distance right now.
And just maybe to connect some of the dots for me, so I understood you said currently it's TOD and Zeitgeist, and there's the TCQSM. But you were saying that created some issues that you were resolving. And I didn't quite understand by the end what those issues were and what your problem statement would have been and then how those work together.
Sure. So the TOD database, right now, you can select it at a stop or a route, and it'll give you basically the census data that's buffered within those stops. And it's just the census or the American Community Survey data. And it's actually it seems pretty useful for TOD, anyone who's interested in it, because it creates a nice report. But the limitation on that is that it doesn't include sort of the more current information that we're talking about from Google Places. It doesn't also describe the frequency of transit or the quality of transit that is in that area. So it's strictly spatial. The same thing with Zeitgeist, which is an app, which is just kind of fun. If you pull it up, it basically tells you what the demographic information around you is, what's the median income, what is the weather patterns. They're just pulling together data around you based on wherever you are with your phone, and it's very neatly stylized and formatted, and it's more of a consumer product. What we were trying to do was combine transit